Good afternoon. It's an absolute pleasure to be presenting at this International Music and Society Conference. My name is Matthew Sargent, based at Bath Spa University in the UK, and today I'm going to be presenting some preliminary outcomes from a data fellowship held with the Southwest Creative Technology Network, entitled Data or Digging on the Digital Mediation of Vinyl Records. I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes. Sales figures for newly pressed vinyl provided by the British Phonographic Industry Trade Association highlight three important dates. In 1991, the then new technology of the CD first overtook vinyl to become the dominant medium of recorded music. From there, vinyl sales continued to decline until 2007. Over the following decade, vinyl sales exponentially increased, returning to circa 1991 levels by 2017. In September 2020, it was widely reported, for example in The Guardian, that vinyl outsold CDs for the first time since the early 90s, a phenomenon that has collectively become known as the vinyl revival. Now, of course, the same decade that saw vinyl revive also witnessed online music streaming become a dominant means of music delivery. Fleischer and Snickers have noted that, as of 2017, the streaming platform Spotify had over 100 million users and 60 million subscribers, with a company valuation of $8 billion. A recent estimate indicates that Spotify holds approximately 50 million tracks in its database. Never before has so much music been accessible to, but not necessarily owned by, a single user, perhaps affirming the age of access over ownership predicted by Jeremy Rifkin nearly 2 decades earlier. Now, this paper in itself is not a critical history of the vinyl format, nor the wider digital musical economy, both of which have been provided extensively in wider literature. Nor is this a paper particularly about the vinyl revival per se. Instead, using ethnographical examinations of vinyl in the contemporary age as a methodology, this paper will challenge existent caricatures of contemporary vinyl culture by illustrating ways in which the medium has, as part of its revival, become increasingly digitally mediated. As a result, understandings of this wider digital economy in regards to music and its socio-cultural and socio-political implications are particularly important to this discussion. Of the many issues that dominate the discourse surrounding this context, its wider conception of music as data is of particular relevance here. Spotify, for example, generates income from advertising, using users' data as a means to target specific audiences for its clients. Maria Eriksson et al. Described the environment as one where, quote, music has become data, end quote. And such a scenario leads Eriksson to observe that, quote, Spotify acts not only as a music provider, but also as a private data broker, end quote. Spotify exposits what John Cheney-Lippold calls the data subject as being the primary unit of corporate interest. Here, quote, the different layers of who we are online and what it means to be who we are is decided by advertisers, marketers, and governments, end quote. A notion of dataveillance, of surveillance through data, arises in music as a result. Pelle Snickers describes user engagement with Spotify as one where, quote, users of Spotify can start a radio station based on artist, song, playlist, album, or even genre. For users, Spotify radio is a lean-back experience, yet with the ability to tune recommendations with thumbs up, thumbs down, or by skipping a song, end quote. Data from user input is then used to generate further recommendations. Thus, algorithmic curation is a common feature of such platforms too. Robert Prey, for example, commentates that the resultant situation is a move away from a consumer image of the self-determining individual to one of an ongoing process of individuation. Now, of course, not all online music consumption comes via online streaming. Most music is encountered through more participatory platforms, such as YouTube, part of what Henry Jenkins describes as part of a wider digitally mediated participatory culture. Yet here, issues surrounding algorithmic curation and the data subject remain or are even amplified. As Christine Larabi says, within such contexts, quote, internet users are ostensibly being used as net slaves, voluntarily giving information unwaged and are enjoyed and exploited, end quote. Kylie Jarrett identifies such participation in digital mechanisms as a manifestation of a neoliberal political economy, where, quote, interactivity is a technology which enables the reproduction of neoliberal regimes of power by producing subjects fit for the continuation of that system of power and its particular regimes of control, end quote. If discourses surrounding contemporary digital music consumption focus on the critical implications of music and data valence, algorithmic curation, and global neoliberal economics, the discourses around the contemporary presence of vinyl in our age focus on very different themes. Bartmansky and Woodward argue that, quote, the objectual quality of analogue copy means it needs to be sourced, selected, carried, shipped, and dealt with physically. It is this physicality that contributes to vinyl's status, end quote. Paul Winters takes this objectual quality even further, noting that, quote, some vinyl consumers do not even own a turntable, end quote. Such discussion also emphasises the physical nature of vinyl's sale, focusing on independent brick-and-mortar record stores. International initiatives such as Record Store Day are often accompanied by special physical-only releases for sale in physical stores only. On wider material culture, David Miller comments that before we can make things, we are ourselves grown and matured like wood in the light of things that come down to us from previous generations, end quote. Similarly, Winters contends that, quote, for vinyl listeners, it is the very imperfections of the technology that help create rituals that constitute the authentic listening subject, which they perhaps connect with a prelapsarian, more innocent time, end quote. Bishkevich and Dich posit a notion of technostalgia, the entanglement of memories with a format, rather than necessarily the format itself. As Andreas Fickers elaborates, technostalgia is, quote, more than just a return to the past, but rather an attempt to mediate between past and present to achieve a particular sound and effect, end quote. Again, such analysis is extended to the physical stores in which vinyl is often bought. Janssen and Harrix comment that, quote, while selling vinyl may be a smart commercial strategy, it also helps to preserve and promote a traditional or ritualized way of listening to music associated with materiality, symbolic value, and intangible experiences. The role of vinyl as a lifestyle commodity is also a feature of such discussion. This perspective is particularly useful when examining vinyl outside of Western contexts. In relation to the Philippines, Monica Shoup observes that, quote, records only started to spread in the 1980s, a time when the transition to the CD format was already well underway, end quote. Shoup observes its popular sale in lifestyle stores, noting that, quote, the Philippine vinyl revival is an instance of a creative use of a fiction rather than an accurate representation of the past, end quote. As Harrix and Janssen outline, record stores' owners and clerks add value by using their knowledge of the marketplace to educate consumers, helping them, for example, to understand and filter the consuming amount of information about music and a vast array of product variations. For the individual consumer, such curatorial practices take the form of practices of vinyl collection, with several scholarly volumes dedicated to the subject, as you can see on the screen. Bartmansky and Woodward note that the special place held by vinyl's physicality in relation to collection, observing that, quote, there is no glory or merit to having your iPod stuffed with millions of electronically cloned files because no serious sacrifice stands behind obtaining them, end quote. So far, as can be seen, little to no attention is paid in such discussion to the kinds of issues being considered in relation to the largely data-driven music consumption at large. At this stage, we should acknowledge that some preliminary discussion of this nature does exist, although it is very slight. Harrix and Janssen, for example, note how, quote, in addition to older consumers trying to resurrect nostalgic experiences of record collecting, young people, in their early teens and 20s, are buying vinyl instead of or in conjunction with digital formats, end quote, a fact that has been empirically verified elsewhere. Winters notes that, quote, the return of analogue music and vinyl records among YouTube and other social media are to a great degree changing notions of context and expertise, end quote. But in actuality, the existence of such comments serve only as the exceptions that prove the rule. Such discussion stops short of considering any influence of data profiling and algorithm within this physical space. Let's move to further challenge this somewhat silo-imaged of vinyl by exploring 3 indicative case studies which demonstrate more deeper entwinements with the data-driven neoliberal economy introduced previously. The website Discogs is an online database and marketplace specializing in physical format releases. Joseph Hartnett writes, quote, Discogs is a free web service offering a large, publicly accessible database of crowd-contributed discographic metadata representing more than 5.3 million unique music releases. Registered users can edit and contribute information to the database and use the metadata to manage and share representations of their personal collections, end quote. Discogs serves an important sales broker for individuals and for small independent retailers, charging a 6 to 8% commission on each transaction conducted. Some studies, for example Cairns of 2010, show that 25% of sales from independent record stores are generated through the Discogs platform. Discogs also hosts a market price history function which algorithmically tracks sales of vinyl through its system and uses this information to value the various pressings and releases held in its database. The prevalence of Discogs among the vinyl buying community means that it is the market price history algorithm that holds a huge degree of power, even over the wider, seemingly offline marketplace. As Richard Carnes points out, individual, quote, sellers are also competing in a market where buyers can find out the price of a record elsewhere just by glancing down a single list, end quote. As noted by Hartnett, users are encouraged to register items in their collections with Discogs to create a profile, using the platform's own bespoke categorization system. The data profile emergent from this can then be used to algorithmically recommend items to the user in the marketplace. The vinyl Discog users are finding and buying therefore not only bypasses the human processes of digging in human-curated physical stores, but is also instead algorithmically controlled in this context. The vinyl consumer too, then, is a data subject. Writing in the Vinyl Factory, Ollie Warwick considers the 2017 vinyl re-release of Japanese ambient electronica artist Midori Katada's 1983 album Through the Looking Glass on the WRWTFWW label, which stands for We Release Whatever the Fuck We Want. I'll just give you a quick blast of what this sounds like. The general vibe. He comments that Through the Looking Glass was plucked from relative obscurity through a series of internet incidents, eventually resulting in a full album rip on YouTube that had amassed around 2 million plays before it was taken down. After a sizable buzz, the album was finally reissued in 2017, end quote. In the same article, Warwick also outlines a more elaborate path re-release taken by Japanese electronica band Utaka no Hibi's 1983 album, Japanese electronica band Myra's 1983 release Utaka no Hibi's, vinyl rips of which were popularized through embeddings from YouTube on the blogs of well-known DJs, before being re-released in 2017 on the newly founded Empire of Signs label, a label specifically started to promote such Japanese electronica. Now, as Merge notes, in specific relation to music, there is a long history of algorithmic curation in social media. YouTube is no exception, and is particularly renowned for its use of algorithmic recommendations in the presentation of suggested content to its users. The context of this case study suggests that YouTube's algorithms played a role in 1. Renewing interest in particular vinyl releases, 2. Renewing interest in an entire genre, that of Japanese ambient electronica, and 3. The founding of a new vinyl-led label specifically for that genre. The A 33 RPM video is a popular form of YouTube content, a format where users upload vinyl rips of 7-inch 45 RPM singles played back at 33 RPM, slowing the tempo of the original track and lowering its pitch, something that I'm sure we've all played with our turntables when we were children. YouTubers present singles that they find are particularly successful at the slower speed and lower key. Such videos always feature film of the spinning turntable, often including the needle drop, the crackling lead-in, and the rise and retraction of the cartridge arm at the end. Such content coheres with the importance noted previously regarding the physicality and objecthood of the vinyl medium, especially when presented visually as a disc hypnotically spinning on a turntable. But within this context, such facets of vinyl are being engaged with almost exclusively via digital mediation. One might conclude that, in engaging with this kind of online content, audiences are engaging with the physicality of vinyl without, and to extend Winter's earlier words, necessarily owning a turntable, or for that matter, any records. Focusing on one such video, in 2010, YouTube user Tom Berry uploaded a 33 RPM video of Dolly Parton's 1973 release, Jolene. Bolstered by duplication on Facebook's own video platform, and a further embedding of the video in a 2017 post by entertainment website boredpanda.com, the video went viral and has now attracted over 10 million views. Users comment constantly on how effective the song is when presented at the slower speed. The success of the video also prompted a number of live acts to post covers of the 33 RPM version of the single, reproducing the slow tempo and lower key of the song in live performance. It's also interesting to note that internet covers database secondhandsongs.com, which provides lists of commercially available cover versions of songs, lists 55 cover versions of Jolene from the period 1973 to 2009. In comparison, the period 2010 to 2020 yields 65 cover versions of the song. That's 6 cover versions per year, an apparent huge increase. While such observations do not present concrete conclusions and are complicated by, for example, a highly commercially successful cover of the song released by the White Stripes in 2004, one might hypothesize at least as to whether an algorithmically curated vinyl experience has fed back into the creativity of the mainstream music industry here. Such facets cohere with what Jenkins describes as a convergence culture, meaning, quote, the flow of content across multiple media platforms and the cooperation between multiple media industries and the migratory behaviour of media audiences, end quote. Convergence culture is innately discursive between personal and corporate domains. It is, quote, both a top-down corporate-driven process and a bottom-up user-driven process, end quote. Through this then, vinyl, it would appear, is not immune to this kind of neoliberal or corporate discursivity. Through such examples, this paper proposes that far from being immune to the issues surrounding the digital world, vinyl is increasingly embedded within it. Of course, much further research is still needed. If the claims made here are true, then, for example, we would also expect to see a mirroring of tropes in other resurgent physical formats, such as the cassette. But this paper contends if the vinyl revival, indeed the convergence culture of the music industry at large, is to be fully understood, physical formats must be folded into discourses of the digital economy, and vice versa. Generally, it seems that vinyl has escaped such inquiry due to its overtly material and physical caricature, shielding it from a digitized gaze. Wider literature, of course, problematizes the material-digital bifurcation on which such methodological assumptions are based. As Radhika Gajala succinctly summarizes, dividing the digital from the material into discrete, mutually exclusive categories is fairly difficult. And Carl Devine reminds us that through the clicking of mice and the swiping of touchscreens, quote, digital music consumption is both physical and tactile, end quote. Conversely, the material has a digital face. As Vilidi Ledonverta points out, quote, in many online arenas, material possessions and consumption styles are flaunted openly, end quote. So maintaining such material but digital distinctions in musicological consideration of format seems a possible route of the oversight of the space revealed here today. One might consider the emergent situation as analogous to Donna Haraway's arguments for the abandonment of the independent notions of nature and culture in favour of a more singular nature culture. That which is revealed through studies such as is presented here asks us whether it might not be time for musicology to abandon the discrete consideration of the material and digital in favour of perhaps simply a singular notion of the contemporary digimaterial. To open the scope of these implications even further, how might thinking digimaterially reshape our understanding of the wider musical landscape, and what creativity could be unleashed through reframing and centralising such an intertwinement? Thank you very much for your time.